efficient asynchronous MPC with linear communication and low additive overhead. And Xiao Yu Qi will give the talk.
Hello. Okay, it works. Hello. Sorry. Hello everyone. I'm happy to be here to give a talk about our recent project on asynchronous MPC protocol. This is a joint work with Akhil, Aniket, Chanda, and Yifan. So for multi-party computation, in this work, we will use N to denote the number of parties, T to denote the corruption threshold, and we assume a fully malicious adversary, and the network setting is asynchronous. We also assume that between each pair of parties, there exists a secure channel. What we want to achieve is guaranteeing that when all parties terminate, they can get the corrected computed output, and the adversary should learn nothing beyond the computed output. So I will briefly introduce the network setting. Compared to the synchronous network, there is no time bound which can guarantee the delivery of messages in the asynchronous setting. So we may not can expect each party can first receive messages from all parties, then continue based on all these messages. So maybe each party can only expect it to receive maybe n minus t message from all parties, then make a decision. This sometimes will bring some difficulties when we design the asynchronous protocol. Recent years, there are many works targeted to improve the efficiency of AMPC protocol. Let's first see the achieved results in the information theoretical setting. Here we use C to denote the circuit size. In CP23, it costs around n to the power 4 field element to evaluate one gate. And later, the authors in GRS24 improve the midterm to amortize linear. Well, the additive overhead is still n to the power 14, which is too high to be practical. Usually, if we want to improve the communication efficiency, we may want to use some cryptography assumption. In CP15, the author used some more homomorphic encryption to get a good results in communication. However, the computation is still very high. Later, the authors in SSL24 give a good construction compared to the result in CP15. The midterm of communication blow up by a factor of n, but it performs better in computation. So we wonder, can we just use some more weaker assumption and balance the communication and the computation complexity? And starting from this point, a previous work proposed a term called lightweight cryptography. For lightweight cryptography, it includes something like symmetric key operation, theorem function, and hash computation. From the view of computational efficiency, this operation performs better than something like discrete log or bilinear pairing operation. So in this work, we only want to use this light cryptography to build our protocol. And in this setting, a recent work achieved a new result which performs better in computation than previous work. However, it's still suffering from a very high communication. And based on their work, we propose some new technique which both reduce the communication and the computation. What we will achieve is an AMPC with amortized linear communication along with the n to the power 4 additive overhead. Also, the total input size to the hash function is also linear to the circuit size. So in this work, we assume the random Markov to build our protocol. Okay, let's start the introduction of the technique part. First, we need to recap the general approach to build the MPC. A party will usually use STEMIL secret sharing to distribute their inputs. Then a party will jointly compute the circuit in an online phase gate by gate and reconstruct the output in the end. The most important part is in the computation phase, and we mainly need to handle the computation of addition and the multiplication gate. Since the STEMIL secret sharing is linear homomorphic, so our party can easily compute the addition gate locally. Well, for the multiplication gate, we can use the trick of Beaver triple. So in this work, we still let all parties first prepare random Beaver triples in the offline phase, and then use this triple to evaluate the circuit in the online phase. Okay, now let's start the introduction about how to prepare degree T sharings. In previous work, we mainly use the asynchronous complete secret sharing, or ACS for short, to handle this issue. For ACSs, it guarantees that when a dealer wants to distribute some sharings, if an honest party accepts his shares, then we can guarantee that the honest party would eventually get their shares. The benefit here is that if later we want to compute some random, maybe some just linear combination about these sharings prepared by ACSS, we can still guarantee the public reconstruction of these degree T sharings due to the error correction property of the degree T sharings. With the help of BU triple, all we need to in the online phase is just to do the public reconstruction of degree T sharings. And now if we use ACS to prepare sharings, we can easily achieve the computation phase with very low communication. However, the previous work are not sufficient for our goal. For IT secure construction, we can achieve amortized linear communication, but the additive overhead is too large. If we additionally assume the random error code to reduce the additive overhead, the May term becomes quadratic. So we need to find another way out. Instead, I'll use ACSS. We know that a weaker version called asynchronous complete secret sharing with identifiable bot will be useful. For ACSID, it's a weaker version than ACSS, which does not guarantee that all parties can eventually get their shares, but maybe a proof. Here, with the proof, a party can use this proof to accuse that the dealer is indeed a copy party. That's why he does not get his shares. Later, we will show how to use this proof. And although ACSID is weaker than ACSS, it still guarantees the public reconstruction of dealer secrets when all parties terminate the sharing phase. And this is also very important. And the previous work already gave a good construction about ACSID, which achieves amortized linear communication with low additive overhead. So since ACSID is very communication efficient, we wonder, can we just use ACSID to prepare degree T sharings? Now let's see what's the problem. Assuming that we are in the online phase now, and our party want to use input sharing X and Y to compute a multiplication gate, and they already prepare a triple for it. With the help of triple, we only need to do the public reconstruction of these two sharings. One is X plus A, and the other is Y plus B. Now you may notice the issue. Since for these degree T sharings, they are prepared through ACSID, so we cannot guarantee that all parties will have their shares. Now, if some honest party cannot compute their share of X plus A or Y plus B, then we can no longer rely on the error correction property to guarantee the success of public reconstruction. So in this work, we will show a new technique which can handle this issue in case some parties do not have their shares but just approve. Our idea is called party admission-based public reconstruction. First, for each degree T sharing to be reconstructed in the online phase, we can decompose it into the following form, where each sharing SI is distributed by party PI through ACSSID. Now you may note that if a party cannot compute his share, he must learn a proof on a copy party, and that copy dealer caused him to not learn his share, and now he cannot compute his share of S. Now let's compare these two sharing. For sharing S, is summation of SI. Well, for the sharing S prime, the only difference is that all parties will use P1 secrets. Okay, in the following, we will assume that P1 is a copy party, which cause some party do not get their shares. Okay, so the difference here is that for sharing S prime, all party will directly use the P1 secrets to compute their share. Now, if our party can somehow agree on that the party P1 is indeed a copy party, we only need to recover the P1 secrets to all parties, and then all parties can locally update their shares. So we do not need to consider case whether we need to let all parties, assuming that P1 is a copy party and some honest party do not have their shares. We do not consider whether we need to let all parties help this party to recover their shares. So all we need to is just recover the secrets. And we also know that as long as we recover the P1 secrets, all parties will not feel the public reconstruction due to this copy party again. To summarize, in order to achieve amortized linear communication, we will use the party admission framework. To be more concrete, we will first let all parties do the public reconstruction for one of n fraction of values in each segment. Since some of them may succeed and some of them may fail, we need to continue to let them use some BA protocol to agree on whether they can agree on the valid public reconstruction. If true, they can proceed. Otherwise, they need to trigger the party admission part, where they need to first agree on a unique party, then recover the secrets and update their shares. One thing to note here is that we need to guarantee that the recovery of the secrets is also should be linear amortized linear communication. This is not achieved in previous construction of ACSID, and in this work, we propose a new construction to address this issue. As a result, we can achieve amortized linear communication per gate in the online phase along with the N2 powerful additive overhead. Now let's move to the part of triple generation. Usually in the sequence setting, we can use DN protocol to let all parties efficiently generate triples on the help of a single party king. Here, the king can be anyone among all parties. However, we cannot directly use the DN technique in the asynchronous setting because maybe a corrupt king may never give a response, and that will result in all parties need to wait forever. To address this issue, previous work proposed a modified version of DN protocol which can let all parties jointly generate triples. Since the triple itself may contain some errors, so we need to continue to do some verification. If the result is true, a party can continue. The communication is linear to the number of triples to be prepared along with the additive overhead. However, since the triple may contain errors, a party may fail the verification. So we still need to use the party emission framework here. The party will divide the generation of triples into error segments. And if they find that the triples are incorrect, they need to do a full localization procedure to detect which party caused or party generate incorrect triples. For the full localization, intuitively, we can let all parties directly exchange their views in this segment to detect which parties send incorrect message. I will not go detail about this part, but just as a result, it would cause quadratic communication to a number of triples along with the additive overhead. Since there are T-query parties and all parties may do this fullization for T times, to guarantee that we can still achieve amortized linear communication, we need to set error to be of size n squared. If we combine them together, now we can see that the total communication will be order of Cn plus n to the power 6. Now we need to consider how can we further reduce overhead from n to the power 6 to n to the power 4. You may know that the reason why the additive overhead is so high is because the fullization procedure is very communication expensive. And that because we let all parties jointly generate triple and they may need to exchange all their views in this segment to detect a corrupt party. So a straightforward optimization idea here is that can we just review partial views to each party and let each party to do the fullization to detect a corrupt party? Intuitively, if it works, we can reduce the communication by a factor of n. In the following, I will mainly focus on how this is achieved, and you can consider that we can reduce overhead to n to the power 5. But actually, with our new technique, use the fullization, we can prevent the use of a primitive for many times, which maybe in previous work it used n squared times, but in this work we only need to use that primitive for n times. And it would automatically reduce our overhead to n to the power 4, but I will not go details about this part. So our idea is followed. First, we need to divide the generation. We still divide the generation of triples into error segments. And the difference here is that we do not let all parties jointly invoke the previous modified version of DN protocol, but just let each party act as king and lead the instance of DN protocol to let all parties generate triple. So we can just execute some synchronous DN protocol. Since honest king will eventually give some response, so all parties can expect it to get triples from the honest king. As a result, all parties still need to verify the triples generated by each king, and if the triples are incorrect, all party will send their views to that king to help him detect which party is corrupted. Intuitively, now each king only need to use 1/n fraction of views in each segment to detect a corrupted party and achieve our goal. At the end of each segment, all parties need to agree on whether out of n kings generate correct triples. If true, they can proceed. Otherwise, they just need to rerun the current segment because each honest king will only fill his generation for at most t times. So all parties can eventually terminate this procedure and generate sufficient number of triples. Now, by carefully designing all subprotocols, we can guarantee that the additive overhead in each segment is only n cubed. Since there are error segments, the total additive overhead will be out of error times n cubed. In order to achieve n to the power 4 additive overhead, we need to guarantee that all parties will fail for at most order of n times. This is achieved with the help of dispute control. Roughly speaking, only a Krabby party will conflict with more than T parties. An honest party will only conflict with the at most T Krabby parties. So when all parties send their views to a king to help him detect a Krabby party, we will let that king to broadcast the dispute pair, which claims that he considers that which party is corrupted. He also needs to send his identity. And when all parties fail the generation, that means that at least all of n kings proposes dispute pairs, and we find this new all of n dispute pairs. Since there are n squared dispute pairs in total, we can guarantee that after at most all of n failure of generation, we can guarantee that all party will eliminate all Krabby party. So which is our goal. As a result, at the end of each segment, all party will first check whether all of n kings generate correct triples. If true, they proceed. Otherwise, they will record all these new dispute pairs and check whether any one of them conflict with more than T plus 1 parties. If true, they will remove this Krabby party and all party will not fail due to this party again. Otherwise, they just need to re-execute the current segment, and we prove that after at most all of n failure times, all party can terminate this procedure. As a result, we can achieve amortized linear communication per triple along with n to the power 4 additive overhead in the offline phase. Okay, that's all from me. Thanks you for listening.
Thank you for the talk. Are there any questions? Maybe I'll have a quick question.
Okay.
Do you see any ways to go below the n to the 4?
Or you mean the Y previous work?
The additive overhead to reduce it further.
Actually, we can improve our online phase to n cube overhead, maybe with some new technique of agreement protocol. But for the offline phase, we need to use a primitive called private stand, and you can assume that allows that when a party sends this message to all parties, if we directly send this message in a P2P channel, then in the asynchronous setting, you cannot verify that whether this sender really sent these messages. So we need to use another primitive called private stand, which can let all party acknowledgement this procedure. And that will need to perform n square additive overhead. So since all party need to execute n instance of this, and there are n parties, so there are n square instance of this primitive, which calls the n to the power 4 additive overhead.
Thank you. Yeah, let's thank the speaker again. So the next talk will be, I have the wrong window open, so I'll wait a moment. So the next talk will be on strong secret sharing with snitching, and it will be a joint presentation by Jan Bormet and Marcin Milnichuk.
Okay, thanks for the introduction. I want to mention this joint work with Stefan Jabowski, Sebastian Faust, and Thomas Lisure. And in our setting, we consider the T out of n secret sharing, but with full collusion. And full collusion basically means that instead of traditionally assuming that only at most T minus 1 parties can be corrupt, now all the parties can potentially be corrupt and try to collude together to illegally reconstruct and learn the secret at a time where they might not yet be supposed to do so. And in our work, we acknowledge that this type of collusion can happen within MPC in practice. So colluders might be interested to maybe only compute a non-trivial function of the secret, and they could try to use MPC, so multi-party computation, to suppress any evidence of the collusion happening from surfacing. And to this end, we built on the secret sharing with snitching framework due to DFLM 24, which is on the one hand basically a standard secret sharing scheme. So suppose a dealer 2 out of 3 shares a secret to 3 shareholders. This just means that any set of two parties should be able to reconstruct the secret, while security should hold against malicious adversaries who can learn at most one secret share. And at the same time, we deal with collusion. So now T or more, say two colluders here, Patrick and Sandy, try to collude together to reconstruct the secret or compute a function of the secret. And they might even do so within MPC. And secret sharing with snitching tries to now give guarantees that whenever such illegal reconstruction happens, now illustrated with three colluders, then at least one of the colluders, in this case, say Sandy, is guaranteed to obtain some evidence that this collusion happened. And with this evidence, Sandy can now go to the dealer and send this evidence to some trusted judge to snitch on one of the other colluders. The judge will check the evidence, and if the evidence is valid, the judge decides to punish this colluder. And we can think of punishments as being tied to some monetary loss of value. So you could implement this in a way where the judge is implemented as a smart contract. Shareholders initially submit some collateral to the contract, and this collateral is burned if they are punished. And anti-collusion is now guaranteed within two notions. On the one hand, we have punishability, which states that whenever illegal reconstruction happens, we are guaranteed that there must exist at least one snitcher who can get someone punished. And unframeability, which means that honest parties, so parties that do not collude, can never get punished. And kind of the tricky part is that we want to guarantee that some colluder learns some evidence, but at the same time, we want to deal with MPC, which can give guarantees that no party should learn anything but maybe its designated output. And for this, the secret sharing with snitching framework makes the assumption of the existence of something called MPC hard hash functions. An MPC hard hash functions is on the one hand just a standard hash function modeled as a random oracle. So in what we call fast queries, parties can just evaluate the hash function, and to do so, they need to know the whole input to the hash function. And this just facilitates something like random oracle extraction. And this is basically unbounded queries, or rather polynomially bounded queries in the running time of the machines. So now we want to also model that the colluders might try to evaluate these hash functions within MPC. And this we call slow queries. And in trying to do so, they try to, like collectively, the collusion as a whole, try to learn the evaluation of the hash function on some input x, but the input should be distributed. So no single colluder should be able to know what is this x that the hash function was queried on. And because we want MPC hardness, we kind of assume that there exists such a function where you can only evaluate it at most sigma times within MPC. And the idea behind getting now or guaranteeing that some party must learn actually evidence whenever illegal reconstruction happens is that we try to design reconstruction in a way that it requires many evaluations of this hash function on some special input, which is then the evidence input. And because not all of these hash functions can be carried out in MPC, at least some of them must be carried out as normal queries, and then we are guaranteed that some of the colluders must learn this evidence input and can consequently snitch. So much for the secret sharing with snitching framework. There exist prior constructions for this. Oh, no, sorry. In summary, this secret sharing with snitching, it gives a cryptographic guarantee that has impact on the colluder strategy in the sense that I, as a colluder, I know now if I collude by, for example, sending over my share, then I might get punished for it. And if I get punished, I will lose my collateral. So it basically disincentivizes collusion to some extent. And there exist constructions for this. However, we now identify in our work some sort of out-of-the-model practical attack that one can run against such schemes. And to see this, suppose that Bob here wants to illegally learn the secret, and he cannot do so because it's a 2 out of 2 sharing. So he tries to convince Patrick to please send over his share so Bob can reconstruct. But Patrick, knowing the guarantees from secret sharing with snitching, will not do so because he's afraid that Bob might snitch on him if he sends over his share. So he will not collude because then he would get punished. And Bob can now try to circumvent these guarantees by setting up a smart contract, and basically an insurance contract, and depositing some money in this contract. And the contract is now guaranteed to act in the following way. Whenever the judge eventually decides to maybe punish Patrick, then the contract will use the money deposited in this contract to compensate Patrick for the punishment. And now if you think about Patrick's perspective, let's say Patrick sends over his share and Bob adheres to his promise and doesn't punish, then everything is fine. The collusion learns the secret and Patrick doesn't get punished. And if Bob punishes, then Patrick will anyway get compensated for the punishment. So now from Patrick's point of view, there's basically no barrier to just colluding and sending over his share. And in our work, we now deal with these types of collusion in the presence of such trusted parties, and in particular with insurance attacks. And we define a model that covers insurance attacks and also a construction that is secure in the strong model. So a construction that is implicitly secure against insurance attacks. And on the way, we kind of get rid with a sort of flaw in an existing construction of secret sharing with snitching, which required honest parties during the sharing phase to evaluate this MPC hard hash function a couple of times within MPC. And this is a really undesirable property because ideally we want to tell some practitioner to please design us such a hash function, which is just maximally MPC hard. And if we now also need to evaluate that function a couple of times in MPC, it's just an opposing set of requirements. So we now come up with a construction that requires no MPC evaluations of the hash function by honest parties in the sharing phase. And Marcin will tell you how this construction works.
Hi, so I will guide you now through the construction, the main ideas, and recall that the MPC hard block is the random oracle. So the natural idea is to combine this punishment data with the random oracle because everything else can be essentially hidden within MPC. So suppose that we have some punishment data P, and we use it to determine some one-time path for the secret. Then we can proceed in the following way. We sample this punishment data, we secret share it, and then we publish the encryption of the secret. Now, this cannot really provide any meaningful guarantees regarding punishability because you can decode it just within a single, using a single MPC hash query. So we will need to do more than that, but it's not really reasonable to assume that no hash queries in MPC are possible at all. And moreover, if you take a look here closely, then this sharing procedure actually would need to be done within MPC. Because if the dealer gets to know the P, then they can frame the shareholders. So if you want to make this sharing procedure a little bit harder to decode and requiring more hashes, we can just add some value Z to be brute forced. And now, in this case, we will add some checksum that the decoder can compare with, and then they will try various values of Z. And finally, once they get to figure out the right one, they can decode the secret S. And here we still need this hashes in MPC, but we have increased the number of hashes that are necessary to reconstruct, to decode. And now I will show you how to get rid of the hashes in MPC altogether. And to this extent, let us call this colorful encoding procedure as ENC. So in the real sharing procedure, what we do is we first do an artificial secret sharing, whose purpose is only to make sure that you need to decode a lot of decodings. We apply the encoding procedure pointwise, and then we do another round of secret sharing, this time for the purpose of secret sharing itself. And within MPC, we discard half of the columns, and what remains in the upper row goes to Alice, what remains in the lower row goes to Bob. And as you have seen, since the dealer has computed all the hashes within the ENC procedure, this requires no hashes within MPC. At a more technical level, the dealer inputs the encodings, the parties just input the randomness. We have the encodings, we drop half of them, we see which, we store the indices that were retained, we secret share them, we secret share the encodings, and then dealer gets nothing, the parties get the secret shares, and for now the judge gets the description of the indices that were retained. In order to reconstruct, we proceed in a very straightforward way. We just get together, figure out which columns were retained, reconstruct the encodings, which allows us to learn this hint that allows us to reconstruct, Then we can go on brute forcing the I and get back to those artificial shares. And finally, we need to undo this artificial sharing, which we just do by doing Chemie reconstruction. A proof that a collision has occurred is going to be a set of columns that were undiscarded, and it's large enough. So what the judge will do upon receiving a candidate proof, it will check whether these columns were indeed retained, so that it has anything to do with the collision, and whether this set is large enough so that the dealer cannot just guess it. So, for example, in this case, this set would be accepted as a valid proof because 2 and 8 were retained, whereas 2 and 6 would be rejected because 6 was discarded. And since the dealer doesn't know anything about you, and if the dealer came up with such as a W, then basically this means that the dealer would need to guess it, which leads to unframeability. For punishability, like, let's see why this scheme is punishable. We need to do the reconstruction of this artificial sharing, and we have discarded half of them, so we need to learn all kappa half of them. And this means that we need to do kappa half of the encoding. And here it is. We got rid of the half of them during the sharing, and now suppose that we are trying to be as efficient in MPC, we are as lucky as possible, and as we have shown, like, we can go get kappa fourth at most. So this means that this remaining part needs to be done directly on your hardware. And by the counting argument, some of the shareholders gets to know as many values PI as they need. And as it stands, it's not yet enough to convince the judge, because the judge wants the indices I and not the values PI. But that's something that the dealer can help with. And then since the dealer knows the mapping between the I and the PI. And I have swept some things under the rug, which I will now explain. So the thing that I swept under the rug is that the judge is public state. And so it cannot hold any secrets. And in our paper, we solve it by using a commit reveal approach when the judge gets the commitments to the set U, and then the parties are supposed to decommit during the punishment phase. And we can also extend it to a threshold setting, just as in our previous work. And here I refer you to either to the paper or the previous CCS talk, where we explained in more detail. And now Jan will tell you a little bit more about insurance attacks.
Okay. So much for the construction. We've seen this insurance attack in the top right, and we know that the scheme as is vulnerable to this attack. And this means this attack is sort of out of the model. Recall that Bob could potentially snitch because he knows Patrick's shares, so he can find such a set. But Bob will not do so, because then he will lose the collateral that he put in the insurance contract. So how can we model these types of attacks? And more importantly, how can we prevent them? And the kind of main idea will be that we want to allow snitchers to also kind of defeat the original adversarial strategy, which included the insurance, by extorting or kind of claiming the insurance money when they're not supposed to. And let's start first with what is an insurance. So an insurance, we just model it as an algorithm which can observe a bunch of things. Most importantly, it can see the public state of the judge. It can observe the evidence that is sent to the judge in the punishment phase, and it can observe whatever punishment the judge outputs. Then also we say that the insurance can receive messages from the colluders, but that's not so important for now. And in the end, the insurance will output either a compensation of a punished party or no compensations. And to define the strong model or the strong punishability requirement, we now carefully design the snitcher's winning conditions. And on the one hand, this is kind of the easy part. A snitcher can win by really punishing some other colluder. So for this, the snitcher needs to get the judge to punish that colluder. But also we require now that this colluder is not compensated by the insurance, because otherwise it wouldn't really be a real punishment, because that party would be reimbursed for that punishment. On the other hand, we now want snitchers to allow to win by extorting the insurance, or rather committing insurance fraud, basically. And to do so, snitchers can try to punish themselves, but only if they get compensated by the insurance for it. So we consider this a win for the snitcher because the snitcher now deviated from the adversarial strategy to claim the insurance money, which must have been put up by some subset of the colluders. So let's look at our scheme. Where does our construction fail this? And to do so, let's just check these strong punishability requirements and see if any snitcher can fulfill any of them. Starting with Patrick, in the attack, he just sent over his share. He didn't learn any information that is sufficient for snitching, so he cannot get anyone punished. So also, Patrick cannot win in any of the conditions. So Patrick as a snitcher, basically. Bob is a bit more tricky. So let's look first at the first condition, which was the real punishment. To do so, to win through this condition, Bob as a snitcher must snitch on Patrick, get Patrick punished. But now the insurance is set up in a way where it compensates Patrick for that punishment. And so kind of the second branch of this winning condition isn't fulfilled. Let's look at the other winning condition, self-punishment or insurance fraud. Now, Bob would have to kind of, this is a bit weird, but Bob would kind of have to punish himself, but the insurance was set up in a way where it only ever compensates Patrick. So also the second branch here isn't fulfilled. So neither of the parties can win as a snitcher. So it's not strong punishable. And what we really want to do is that Patrick, who was initially offered this insurance, has some ability to extort it. So we kind of want Patrick to be able to win to the second condition. And for this, we design a mechanism for self-punishment. So a mechanism for Patrick to try and punish himself. And for this, let's say every party has a secret key and the public keys are known. And now we modify what counts as evidence. So in order to punish Patrick, one now either submits a real punishment proof or one can submit Patrick's secret key. So looking back at the situation, Patrick, knowing his own secret key, can now snitch on himself. The judge will punish him, and then the insurance will trigger and compensate Patrick, which means Bob has lost his money that was put up in the insurance, and Patrick, as a snitcher, wins through the second winning condition. So everything is fine now, but there's like some small issue we need to deal with. So recall that I have said that the insurance can observe the evidence that is sent to the judge. And now we can try to design an insurance as an attacker, which more selectively decides when to compensate. So the insurance could, for example, compensate whenever real punishment happens, when real evidence was sent, which it's actually intended to do. But when it kind of sees that the evidence is equal to a secret key, then it will not compensate because it kind of can detect that this is an attempt at insurance fraud. So it's always a problem if the insurance can distinguish real punishments from self-punishments or attempts at defrauding the insurance. And to kind of get rid of this issue, it's a bit simplified, but what we are going to try to do is, instead of sending the evidence in plain, we hide it behind a disjunctive zero-knowledge proof. So instead of just sending whatever was my evidence, I just prove in zero-knowledge to the judge that I know a witness which either corresponds to this subset or it corresponds to the punished party's secret key, which would be known to the party whoever self-punishes. We need to kind of take care that is the secret key really of the punished parties, because otherwise you could trivially punish a different party and would no longer be unframeable. So let's quickly look at what we've seen in this talk. We've seen a new collusion model that accounts for the stronger type of insurance attacks. We've seen a construction that is secure in the strong model. And as an added benefit, we have gotten rid of the hash evaluations in MPC, or the MPC hash evaluations in MPC during the sharing phase. Yeah, thanks for listening, and we're ready to take any questions.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you. We maybe have time for one quick question. Then I think for the sake of time, maybe we can take questions offline. Thank you again.
Thanks.
Clicker.
So the next question, the next talk will be on how to make any computational secret sharing scheme adaptively secure, and George Liu will give the talk.
Yes. Hello, I'm George, and this is a joint work with Brent Waters. So we can begin with what a secret sharing scheme is. And in a secret sharing scheme, we have a dealer who has a message in mind, as well as a policy function. And what a secret sharing scheme enables you to do is that the dealer can distribute their message or secret into a set of shares where any subset of users which satisfy this access policy should be able to recover the secret. But on the other hand, any subset which doesn't should learn nothing about it. And a natural question you may ask is, what sorts of policies can you secret share? So the study of this really began in the late 70s with the works of Shamir and Blakely, which focused on secret sharing threshold policies. And later on, this was sort of expanded to the class of monotone span programs, which includes monotone Boolean formulas. And it turns out that many of these earlier works considered secret sharing in the information theoretical setting. But if you're willing to assume some computational assumptions, you can actually secret share even broader classes of policies. Maybe the first and most notable was this work from Yao and Vinod and et al. On secret sharing for monotone Boolean circuits. And in the computational setting, security of secret sharing is defined through these security games. And perhaps the classic and most commonly considered definition is this definition of static security, where the adversary chooses beforehand a subset of users to corrupt. And when the dealer distributes their shares, this adversary obtains that set of shares and is now tasked with guessing the message or secret that the dealer has sent. You could also consider a natural, stronger definition of secret sharing, which we'll call adaptive security, where instead of committing to the set of corrupted users up front, the adversary can select, let's say, a single share to corrupt, and using this information can sort of adaptively inform which shares he's going to corrupt next. Now, and once they're happy, once again, this adversary can guess a share, guess a secret. So why would we care about adaptive security? Well, first of all, it's pretty easy to see that this is a stronger definition of security in that the adaptive definition applies a static definition, which does mean that both for secret sharing itself, if we're able to prove adaptive security, this is both a strictly better thing, and any other crypto which uses secret sharing as a building block will naturally have a stronger definition to work with. In addition, sort of as a standalone definition, this is perhaps even a more realistic model of security where real-life adversaries could be, rather than being some fixed set of corrupted parties, could be some bounded adversary with, say, bounded computation or other financial resources and can choose to corrupt or compromise parties on the fly. But on the unfortunate side, many of these computational secret sharing schemes we know of are only proven statically secure. So in our work, we show a generic transformation using only symmetric key encryption, which turns any statically secure secret sharing scheme to an adaptively secure one while preserving the policy class of the secret sharing scheme. Our transformation only incurs a polynomial security loss, and our share sizes grow quadratically with the share size of the base scheme. So to get into our result a little more, let's look at the syntax of the secret sharing scheme, where we have a share algorithm, which takes in the policy we're considering, as well as a message or secret to be shared, and outputs a set of shares. And a reconstruction algorithm, which takes in a subset of these shares and recovers a message. And in our notation, there will be a public share, and this n will be the number of users, which is sort of implicitly defined by the policy. So to get adaptive security for secret sharing, we'll go through roughly 2 transformations. Starting with the static scheme, we can use symmetric key encryption to get this intermediate notion we call semi-adaptive secure secret sharing. It turned out, so in this definition, we'll be able to get a little bit of adaptivity But it turns out that this will, in turn, later be useful for getting the full adaptive notion that I just showed. And now to formally state what I mean by static and adaptive security and semi-adaptive, which is our new intermediate definition. In the static security definition, the adversary commits to essentially all their decisions up front, including the policy, the message, the subset of corrupted shares. And the challenger is just in one shot has to return all the relevant information, which includes the public share as well as all the user shares of the corrupted indices. In contrast, in the adaptive definition, the adversary commits to most of this information up front, except for notably this subset of corrupted users. He receives the public share, and now there's a secondary phase where the adversary can request for indices and receive shares in return before needing to guess the bit. Now, in our intermediate notion of semi-adaptive security, we begin with the adversary just sending the number of parties, and we still retain this adaptive query phase where the adversary asks for an index and receives the share. But importantly, the adversary doesn't actually get to see the public share until afterwards. Now, and of course, at the end, they have to guess the challenge bit. Now, if you look at this definition a little bit, one thing you might realize is even syntactically, this doesn't quite make sense for secret sharing schemes as I described on the previous slide, because how would you even know? You need to at least be able to generate shares without knowing the policy and message, right? So we sort of define this notion of decomposability for secret shares, even for the semi-adaptive notion to make sense. And in this definition, instead of having our share algorithm as sort of a single algorithm, we split it into a share key and a share message algorithm. And this, looking a bit ahead, we notice that it'll be important that this enables us to actually share many different messages using the same subset of shares. And to go from static to semi-adaptive security is actually quite simple. So I've already told you we use symmetric key encryption and a static secret sharing scheme. And what this first share key algorithm is instead of giving out the shares of my static scheme, I'll just give you a fresh symmetric key. And when it comes time to share the message, I'm going to essentially publish an entire statically secure secret sharing scheme in the clear. But instead, I'm going to encrypt each of these shares under the fresh secret keys corresponding to each of these symmetric keys generated in the first step. And so if you think about this a little bit, it should be pretty easy to see that this does meet the definition of semi-adaptive security, because this public information, a second component, is only revealed at the very end. So you can leverage the symmetric key encryption to remove any shares that you don't have and prove and rely on the static security of your underlying secret sharing scheme. So now that we've achieved a little bit of adaptivity, the question is, how can we actually use this to build an adaptive scheme? And so the approach we take is like, you can imagine you start out with your semi-adaptive scheme, and this has a little bit of adaptivity, but we don't trust the users that much. So instead, we're going to encode our semi-adaptive share inside another secret sharing scheme. And it turns out that doing this once doesn't do that much, but we'll actually continue doing this until we have a nested sequence of roughly n+1 secret sharing schemes, where a user's share now is only a single share of the nth scheme here in the clear, as well as encodings of the other shares sort of nested within the subsequent secret sharing scheme. So zooming out, let's say in an example of 5 users, what actually happens is we'll have a level 5 secret sharing scheme, say, and using the secret sharing scheme, we're going to encode the shares of a subsequent secret sharing scheme, and so on and so on and so on until only at the very last level are we going to encode the message to check that this is still a valid secret sharing scheme, we can see if we have any subset of users which does in fact satisfy the policy, they can use their outermost level 5 shares in the clear to recover their own level 4 shares. And now this process can sort of be repeated until they're able to recover their final level 0 shares, which in turn allows them to recover the message. So this scheme is at the very least correct. And now the next step is, and maybe the most interesting part, is showing that this is actually adaptively secure. So if we look at the adaptive security game with our transform scheme, let's see what it looks like. So we know that the public share to begin with is just going to be this encoding of the message under the zeroth scheme. And when an adversary corrupts a user, they receive this essentially vector of secret shares. And if we zoom in here on the level 5th scheme, we can see that you can actually use semi-adaptive security here. In particular, on this very last share, which the adversary receives, because he's received all of the level 5 shares for that scheme already, we can use semi-adaptive security to switch this very last share into a sharing of 0, sort of regardless of which user this corruption query actually was on. Now sort of turns out that you can carry out this argument on every single share of this last row here, which means that on the last corruption query the adversary makes, instead of receiving this whole vector of shares, they effectively receive only a single sharing of the underlying semi-adaptive scheme. And now once we've carried out this argument, the observation we can make is that if we ignore this level 5 and last secret sharing, we can, if we look at just the point of view of the 0th through 4th scheme, that we're essentially ended up in the same situation, except now the last corruption query does not matter at all. And so if we just look at the 0th through 4th scheme, we can leverage semi-adaptive security again to erase the information from the second to last share. And if we kind of carry out and repeat this argument, what we'll notice we end up with is that what the challenger only has to give out is this degrading like staircase of shares. And importantly here, if we look at the level 0 share, the adversary actually has received no sharings of the secret sharing scheme. Once we're at this point, we can directly rely on the static or semi-adaptive security of the level 0 scheme to erase the message and argue security. So just to summarize our result, we present a generic transformation, which turns any statically secure secret sharing scheme into an adaptive one. Notably, this gives the first adaptively secure secret sharing scheme for monotone Boolean circuits using only polynomially secure one-way functions, as well as adaptively secure secret sharing for monotone MP, assuming witness encryption and one-way functions. Now, in our work, we present a couple extensions where we are able to get smaller share sizes for perhaps specific classes of policies. And maybe the general open questions left in this area are, can we get something with smaller shares for the full like generality of a policy class, or if there is possibly a lower bound in this area? Yes, our paper is on ePrint.
Thank you for the talk. I have time for questions. Are there any questions?
So the full transformation, it's the number of levels is proportional to the number of users in the secret sharing scheme. Well, it's computational, right? So I think for our like decomposed transformation, you can use the same set of shares to share many different messages. If that's so, each scheme is of the same size. Yeah, the shares don't grow with the message. Yes.
Maybe I also have a quick question. What's your, for the open questions, do you have an intuition or feeling if you rely only on one-way functions, if the n squared is optimal or you can go below?
I don't have any like maybe concrete thoughts on this. It feels difficult to maybe get anything sublinear, at least with kind of the approach, some approach like this. But it seems plausible that maybe the going below quadratic or getting something linear seems plausible.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. There's another question, I think. We still have time. Do you want to come to the microphone or?
Okay. So do your okay. Do your results okay, well, I'll stay here maybe. So do your results also apply to the recent kind of succinct constructions?
So our like the transformation applies and it's still adaptively secure. Since there is an overhead, right? It may not necessarily be succinct. So if you get, I think it's like context dependent on which of these results you're talking about, like sort of which policy class you're considering. But essentially, I think if it is still succinct after an n squared overhead, then it would still be succinct.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So the next talk will be fully anonymous secret sharing, and Paul Liu will give the talk.
Right. Can you guys hear me, or is this too soft? Okay, so I'm Paul. I'm presenting on fully anonymous secret sharing. This is joint work with Allison, Matthew, Yuval, and Abhishek. So this is the too long, didn't read, or didn't stay for the talk slide. So what do we do in this talk or in this paper? We study what we call fully anonymous secret sharing, or FAS for short, and it consists of two parts. The first is what we call share anonymity, and it comes in three flavors, S, M, and U. And then there's this property called anonymous reconstruction. And both have existed in the literature. We kind of unify it in some way. And we also study this property called robust reconstruction, which is reconstruction in the presence of multiple dealers in this, which is most interesting in this anonymous setting, and ideally for an unbounded polynomial number of dealers. And in this work, we give information theoretic upper and lower bounds on the share size that are nearly tight for this setting. And we also show the use of cryptography circumvents these lower bounds. So let me motivate the various definitions of share anonymity through a really simple example. So let's start with Shamir secret sharing. You have a dealer with a secret S, and to split the secret S, he picks a random polynomial of degree t-1 for t out of n secret sharing, where the constant term is the secret S. And every party I, gets the share I comma p of I. And this is a scheme that's perfectly correct, perfectly secret, and has optimal share size. However, every party share reveals its identity because party I has I in its share. And a basic question is, can a party's share hide its identity? And that is, can we achieve some notion of share anonymity? And it's not hard to imagine that if you just use a permutation pi and give out pi of I comma p of pi of I, this now hides the party's identity because pi is hidden. So in other words, we've preserved all the previous properties, and we have this additional property of share anonymity, which in this setting we call single dealer anonymity, or S anonymity. And you might ask, is this permutation enough to anonymize all interesting information while preserving all these other desirable properties? And let me introduce to you another notion of anonymity, which we call M anonymity, or multi-dealer anonymity. And here in this setting, you have dealer 1 and dealer 2 with their own secrets. And the adversary is given either a set of unauthorized shares produced by a single dealer, or a mixture, a set of some shares from dealer 1 and some shares from dealer 2. And this notion was previously motivated and studied by this work of Eldridge, Beck, Green, Henninger, and Jane in their Usenix paper. for abuse-resistant location tracking. So imagine AirTags where on one hand you want to preserve the privacy of honest users, but you want to prevent malicious behavior like using it for stalking. So we note now that permuted Shamir secret sharing does not satisfy this notion of M anonymity. And imagine the adversary selects, party 1 and 2 and receives the following 2 shares, a mixture. It gets share 1 from dealer 1 and share 2 from dealer 2. And sharing 1 uses permutation pi 1, and sharing 2 uses permutation pi 2. And there's a 1 out of n probability that pi 1 of 1 collides with pi 2 of 2. However, if they use the same permutation, the probability of that occurring was 0. So now the adversary has a 1 out of n distinguishing advantage for this M anonymity game. So fix is, instead of doing a permutation, you just pick a random field element and evaluate the random field element. And this is just random Shamir secret sharing. And it doesn't just satisfy M anonymity, it actually satisfies the property that any unauthorized set of shares is uniform random. So this is what we call U anonymous. However, you incur a correctness hit. The correctness error is now 1 out of Q, because let's say I have 2 X points that collide. I don't have enough unique points to run polynomial interpolation. And so for negligible correctness error, your share size will grow now to lit omega of log n. And so just flashing back to the too long didn't read slide, we've just defined S, M, and U anonymity informally. And these are all strictly containing each other. And now we're going to go to these notions of reconstruction. So robust and anonymous reconstruction, let's start with robust reconstruction. So imagine you have k-many dealers all emitting Shamir secret shares. So you get a bunch of X points in their evaluations. How would you be able to recover all secrets corresponding to authorized sets from these dealers? After all, if you have enough points, you could polynomially interpolate to whatever you want. So an easy solution is that every dealer tags its share with a dealer ID. And so you would only run polynomial interpolation on those corresponding to the same dealer ID. But this violates M anonymity. And in their previous work, they gave an error-correcting code-based M-anonymous scheme that handles a constant number of dealers for the threshold access structure. And then going to anonymous reconstruction, note that polynomial interpolation doesn't care which parties hold which shares. And this is what we refer to as anonymous reconstruction. So here's a non-example for anonymous reconstruction. Consider an access structure over 3 parties where your minimal authorized sets are just the set of P1 and the set of P2, P3. And P1 just gets a share, which is the secret, and P2, P3 get an additive secret share of S. And if I gave you any 2 shares, how would you know whether to XOR them to return one or the other? Of course, you could tag them with party identities, but this would not even be S anonymous. So now we've defined anonymous reconstruction and robust reconstruction. And let me tell you a little bit about the technical challenge of building fast schemes for arbitrary access structures. So almost all known methods of constructing secret sharing schemes for arbitrary access structures breaks the access structure down into components like ands and ors, or ands and ors and thresholds, or just thresholds, and uses this idea of recursive composition. And when you use recursive composition, you actually kill anonymity. And let's consider an example of why. So consider an access structure that has an AND of 2 thresholds. So you have n parties, and you split the n parties into n over 2 left parties, n over 2 right parties. And you want at least t from the left side and t from the right. Well, one idea is that let's just additively split S into S1 and S2, and then run a t out of n over 2 thresholds for S1 and S2. But note, if I give you an unauthorized set of t plus 1 left parties, no matter what t you pick, you're going to reconstruct to the same value. So actually, you can detect that these shares are correlated. And to be anonymous intuitively, every such set of t plus 1 left parties should partially reconstruct to a different value. And not only that, this means that somehow the right side share, if you have enough shares on the right side, should have enough information to allow you to reconstruct from all these many possible reconstruction paths. So this is a little bit of intuition for why there should be a very strong lower bound on the share size for fully anonymous reconstruction. Just to talk about prior work, because this, you might be imagining, this is such a natural definition, it must be studied. And indeed, all the way back in '88, they studied what they call anonymous secret sharing, which just referred to anonymous reconstruction. And they proved various lower bounds and feasibility results for a very restricted class of access structures, mainly threshold, and some interesting infinite class of non-threshold access structures. And then for share anonymity, S anonymity was first really explored in the work of Guillermo Martin O'Keefe. And there they also simultaneously considered anonymous reconstruction as this definition of submission anonymity. And these observed some interesting results for SFAS. And then this work of Paskin, Chernyavsky, and Olamide, they studied what was morally M anonymity, but actually their scheme implicitly achieves statistical UFAS for arbitrary access structures. And then most recently, this work of Eldridge et al., they constructed statistical UFAS with robust reconstruction for constantly many dealers for the threshold access structure. And they also gave a practical application for MFAS for this abuse-resistant location tracking. So what do we do in our work? On the information theoretic side, we improve the upper bound to lower the share size from the previous scheme, and we give a nearly matching lower bound on the share size up to log factors. And this implies that the upper bound is a near optimal generic construction for any monotone access structure. And this is rather surprising because in contrast, in standard secret sharing, there's an exponential gap between known upper and lower bounds on share sizes. And so this really separates the notion of FAS from standard secret sharing. On the computational side, we give a generic compiler that takes any secret sharing scheme and transforms it into a computational M fully anonymous secret sharing scheme. It preserves the share size of the underlying scheme up to poly lambda factors, where lambda is independent of the number of parties. And the secrecy is based on the hardness of LWE. And we also give some direct constructions from one-way functions and DLin for specific graph access structures. And these results circumvent the information theoretic lower bound. And all of our computational schemes enjoy unbounded polynomial dealer robust reconstruction. So just a quick note on the computational contributions, because we don't have that much time. The generic compiler uses compute and compare obfuscation. And the statement of the particular graph access structures is the existence of one-way functions implies UFAS for the star graph access structure. So for a graph access structure, you can think of every node as a party and every edge as a minimum authorized set of size 2, where the share size is order lambda, independent of the number of parties n, and it circumvents this lower bound of omega n. And then similarly, we get a similar result for the complete bipartite graph access structure from the hardness of DLin. And for the sake of time, we're only going to detail the information theoretic results. Our lower bound is formally stated here, but for the sake of the talk, we're just going to fix d equals 2. And this just says that for every m and n, there's an access structure with order m parties whose access structure representation as a DNF has 2 to the n minterms of degree order m. And the per parties share size is the number of minterms. So it's omega, at least omega, big omega L. The upper bound says that for any monotone DNF formula phi with L minterms of maximal degree T and statistical correctness parameter lambda, there exists a UFAS scheme realizing this access structure with perfect U anonymity, implying perfect secrecy, statistical correctness, and this per party share size, which in this context is O tilde of L. Okay, so nearly optimal. So let me quickly go through how you get an upper bound. So you take any access structure and represent it as a monotone DNF. For example, our old friend here is represented as this DNF with 2 minterms, one of degree 1 and one of degree 2. It's really faint, but technically it's still there. The circle remains. But the information theoretic solution from the past work is to freshly share the secret for each minterm. And so we can ignore degree 1 minterms because they just get the secret, and it doesn't affect correctness or any of the other properties. So let's just consider this minterm of degree 2. what you're going to do is you're going to sample 2 random linearly independent vectors of length 2, in this case, number of parties minus 1. And you're going to plant a linear dependency between party 2 and party 3, and every party I just gets vi. And the perfect reconstruction comes from the fact that you just find the minimal linear dependency and just compute this dependency. And then if you're given v2 or v3, which are the unauthorized sets, note here that they're identically distributed. And then finally, for statistical U-anonymity, this is where we slightly modify their scheme by just making the field very large. That's what we mean by it was implicitly in their work. If you make the field large enough, linearly independent vectors are statistically close to random vectors. And this works for any degree T minterm. So similar idea, you plant this linear dependence and all 3 properties hold. However, the share size here is O tilde L times N, where L is the number of minterms. And note here that even for very simple and explicit access structures, such as this one written as a CNF, but if you just distribute it, you get a DNF with a number of minterms. This L term is exponential in N. So you can ask, is an exponential per party share size necessary? And we saw previously in the AND of 2 threshold access structures that perhaps the answer is yes. And an easy way to get a linear lower bound, which is already better than what we can say for even the standard secret sharing setting, where we have a lower bound of n over log n, is that we can look at the star graph access structure, and it captures the bit complexity needed in a single share. So why is that? How do we interpret these properties? Well, secrecy says that every leaf share, so you have n leaf shares in one center share, must have at least 1 bit of entropy because it hides the secret. U-anonymity says that all these leaf shares are conditionally independent, which means that they can't all be the same value. Think of M-anonymity if they were all of the same value. That would be catastrophic. And then the correctness is that the center node has to have enough information that it can reconstruct from any of these leaf shares. In other words, we can prove, just by an entropic argument, that the center share needs at least n bits of entropy. And since the center node by itself is unauthorized and every leaf node is unauthorized, the leaf nodes must also contain at least n bits of entropy. So this gives you a lower bound of omega n for this particular access structure. And actually, this idea keeps going if you consider, for example, the 2n star graph. So here you split 2n plus 1 parties into n left parties and right parties in the center node. And a minimal authorized set is any left party, any right party, and the center party. And again, what you do is you consider a left share by itself and imagine you had 1 center node and 1 right node. You repeat this argument and you'll see that the left node has at least omega n bits of entropy in its share. And by symmetry, so does the right. And if each of these have omega n, then the center node must have omega n squared. So this type of argument just keeps going to any mk star graph with a lower bound of omega k to the m bits per party. And so, for example, this example of the M2 star graph gives you a lower bound of 2 to the m bits of entropy on the center node. And this actually extends to m fast, not just u fast, because what property did we really use? For anonymity, we use this idea of conditional independence. And m fast already implies this conditional independence property. And just note that this is separated from s fast because for the star graph, you can get a 1-bit solution. Okay, great. And then just a quick note on how to reduce the upper bound. The key idea is instead of sampling linearly independent vectors, you're going to sample uniform random vectors over a shorter dimension. And the correctness will change because there won't be a minimal linear dependency anymore, but all you know is that you just have to look for every minterm at the degree of its minterm and look for linear dependencies for that particular degree. Good. So open questions. There's a lot. Does there exist information theoretics? This is a strictly feasibility question, not a efficiency question, this first one. Does there exist information theoretic fast schemes for the threshold access structure with both perfect correctness and perfect U-anonymity? So we saw if you use randomized Shamir, you take a hit on correctness. And Ronnie Kahn this year showed that in the ramp setting, the answer is yes. And the simplest open case is the 3 out of 5 threshold. So if you can get perfect correctness and perfect uniformity, that's already very interesting for just the 3 out of 5. Another question is for weighted threshold access structures. Can you obtain computationally efficient information theoretic S-fast schemes? So we're asking for a very weak notion of anonymity here. And if you use the standard virtualization approach where, if I have weight W, I get W many shares, this fails to achieve S anonymity because if I get W shares and someone else gets 1 share, then obviously you can tell there's a difference between the length of the share. You can try to pad, but then padding breaks correctness and you have to deal with anonymous reconstruction issues. Finally, are one-way functions sufficient for general computational fast schemes? And in the other direction, does efficient computational UFast for CNFs, for example, imply any public key primitives? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? So I'll have a question for your open questions, the last 2. Do you think one-way functions will be enough, or do you expect there are some lower bounds also?
There could be some lower bounds related to like broadcast encryption and stuff like this for certain access structures. So we're not sure though. So we could go either way.
Okay, so we'll have to wait.
Yeah.
Thanks. So yeah, let's thank all the speakers of the session again for all the great talks. And then there's lunch.